means VolQuest's Brent Hubbs is right around the corner, joining us this morning, talking Tennessee football, athletics, and life, as he always does. Brent, what's up? How are you?
I'm doing great. Are we airing grievances this morning, or are we all happy? What are we doing?
I think we're happy.
I think we're happy. Will's extra happy because he won the bet with Pittsburgh and Cleveland last night.
Home dog in Cleveland last night, Brent. Everyone else doubted Jameis Winston, not I.
Are you having crab legs for lunch? That's the question.
I might be, honestly. As our good friend Rhett Bryan would say, I attended bragging camp earlier this morning.
He did, Hubbs, and I'm okay with it. Okay, Will's cool. You see what I'm saying? Like, he came in.
I don't win much. I got to take advantage of what I do.
Smirk on his face, and I was just like, all right, I get it. I picked the Steelers, and you didn't. Okay, I get it, Hubbs.
So much fun. Brent, you must know, too, that when Ramon does picks against the spread, it's always with his heart. It's either for Tennessee, it's for Pittsburgh, it's against Florida, against Shane Beamer in South Carolina for some reason. But as you know, the version of South Carolina Ramon played against was a little bit better than most versions of South Carolina that Tennessee used to play against.
Yeah, that's true. South Carolina's so you're telling me he's the Ward Manual. He just picks with his heart when he works on who he's pulling for.
I'm trying to make sure this thing worked the right way, okay? Because my other picks this weekend, hear me out real quick, okay? There's Ole Miss in Florida. I got plus 10.5 Florida, all right? I'm really banking on this one. And I got Alabama OU. Listen, 13.5 OU. I'm here for it. That's all I'm telling you, man. These are the things that I need working in my
Hubbs goes, ooh.
Yeah, come on, Hubbs.
OU?
Yeah, listen.
On purpose.
This is
it's
how
crazy.
I do these things, okay, Hubbs? All right? They'll win.
You choose to lose.
New slogan.
I love it.
Choose to lose.
Well, Brent, let's start there with Tennessee, with what the playoff committee told us. Look, this thing does change week to week, and it's so interesting, the kind of made-for-TV event this has become. But, Brent, with Tennessee where they are outside looking in, probably needing a little bit of help in front of them, how much concern do you have for Tennessee's playoff chances at this point and the things that are going to happen for them to get in?
Well, I mean, yeah, I think they've got to have some help. But the first thing Tennessee's got to do is Tennessee's got to take care of Tennessee, and I think in a big way. I think one of the interesting things that came out of Ward Manuel's interview he did with ESPN when they asked him about analytics versus eye test, and he said, well, we watch games, and implied that the eye test carried probably more weight than the analytics. Analytics was more of a guide, okay? Well, guess what? On Saturday, they ain't watching Tennessee, okay? They're just not. I mean, you look at it, who's playing at noon? Indiana, Ohio State. Who else is playing at noon? Ole Miss, Florida. Who else is playing at noon on cable on ESPN2? SMU, Virginia. Where's Tennessee playing? 1 o'clock on the streaming network.
Yeah.
So what are they going to look at for Tennessee? They're going to look at the score. So if that game's 6-3 going 5 minutes to go in the first half, and that's what's crawling across the bottom of the crawl, what's the impression going to be on the committee? So the first thing Tennessee's got to do is they got to take care of business. And in my opinion, that means you lay the hammer to UTEP on Saturday. Now, if you beat UTEP like you're supposed to, are you going to get a bunch of credit for it? No. But if it's a close, tight, kind of ugly football game, then that's not going to help your eye test, because their eye test about this game, in my mind, is going to be the score, because I don't think a lot of people are going to be pulling that up on the committee and watching the stream instead of watching the what Indiana and Ohio State are doing on Saturday. So it starts there for Tennessee. And, yeah, you need Florida to win. That would be a huge help. You need Notre Dame to lose. That would be a big help. You don't have to have all these things, but you got to probably have some help along the way. At least that's what it feels like right now. Now, the narrative Tuesday night next week might be totally different, but based on what we heard this past Tuesday, that's kind of what it feels like right now.
So, Brent, I know Indiana has kind of become the mark. I mean, they've got the big game, obviously, on Saturday, like you mentioned, against Ohio State. I know Greg Sankey's even gone to Twitter to say, hey, look, here's strength of schedules from 3 different metrics of our teams compared to some of those other teams. In your mind, is Indiana vulnerable if they lose big? Could Tennessee have a better resume in the committee's minds, or are you more focused on these SEC teams or Texas when they got to play Texas A&M? Like, where do you think a team in front of Tennessee could be most vulnerable that's practical for Tennessee to say, all right, they lose, we've got a good shot?
Well, I mean, I think the easiest one is if Ole Miss loses, because then that's a 3-loss Ole Miss team, and that takes them out of the equation. Okay, so that's the easiest one. Now, I think this was, again, going off his comments that the head of the committee made on Tuesday night on his teleconference. That, well, we're splitting hairs with the SEC teams. Well, my question is why? Okay, shouldn't you split hairs with the SEC teams in Penn State, the SEC teams in Indiana? You know, the SEC teams and some other teams in the playoff ranking. Why is it just that you're splitting hairs over the 2-loss SEC teams? Or is the desire for the committee right now to have an even number of Big Ten teams in the field, in the playoff field, and an even number of SEC teams in the field? I don't know. We're going to find out if Indiana loses how far they fall. Because we'll get a good gauge then on whether they're okay with more SEC teams than Big Ten teams, or if they want to keep it even between the two power conferences. So, I mean, I think it should be compared to everybody, but it feels like right now, this week, and again, it changes week to week, but this week the discussion was about, how you separate the 2-loss SEC teams as opposed to comparing them to everybody else. I think the fact, a lot of people are talking about Texas A&M next weekend. If Texas were to lose that game, they're a 2-loss team, A&M's a 2-loss team, and you've jumbled it up more, okay? Somebody put this scenario in my head. What if Alabama runs the table, wins the SEC championship game? That helps Tennessee's resume. Texas loses the SEC title game. They've got 2 losses. A lot of people, not a lot, but some think Texas could be out. I don't think there's any way somebody's going to fall 9 spots losing a conference championship game. Because I think the commissioners and the committee are going to protect the championship game. Because what? Lane Kiffin's already come out this week and said, hey, we really don't need to be playing these things or playing in them because it doesn't help you in your ranking necessarily, and it doesn't give you the bye that everybody else gets. So it's really unfair. Why do we want to play in this game? So how heavy are you going to punish somebody for losing that game would be interesting to see. But that's a long ways away. You got 2 regular season weeks and a big one this weekend first.
Brent Hubbs of VolQuest with us today, man. And we're having a conversation right now, a little bit based off of his War Room articles he write up each and every Friday. Man, y'all going to subscribe and check that out because Hubbs is just the coolest doing it, okay? I just want to throw that out there. You can save that and put it on your profile too, Hubbs, okay? With that being said, this upcoming weekend and just looking at the strength of schedule conversation, right? When you come to these pay-to-play schools like UTEP or Chad or Kent State, considering that they had a board director last week mention Mercer in Alabama, and that's the hot word right this past weekend, Mercer. Does it create a bloodbath from here on out for those types of schools? Because it seems to me that the style points and how you win does somewhat matter.
Sure. I think it's absolutely the case. I mean, you can make the argument that Josh Heupel made a mistake taking a knee at the end of the Mississippi State game against his friend Jeff Lebby. What is the feeling? What are people's feelings on that game if there's 7 more points on the board? He took a knee against Chattanooga early in the year. Now, I mean, if you're winning 70 or something I don't know that matters. Again, this game doesn't need to be like Austin Peay a year ago, right? I mean, this does not need to be one of those kind of slog through it. I mean, you got to take care of business and you got to look impressive. Now, are you going to get a bunch of favor for winning big? No. But will you get some punishment for not winning big in the eyes of the committee? Probably. If the human, and again, I'm not knocking the committee. This thing's a beauty contest because there's a human element to it. There's a bias to it. It's natural, right? I mean, if you are a fan or you played in the AFC, then you have one feeling about that side of NFL football that's probably different than somebody who played in the NFC, right? If you played in the NFC North, you're going to always think that's the hardest division in football. Okay, if you played in the AFC East, you're going to think that was the best division, or whatever the case may be. That's human nature, and we have people on the committee who have direct ties currently to various schools and conferences. It's only natural. It's not their fault. It's just the human element in all this is what nobody can figure out. And we want to talk about analytics and put strength of schedule up and, all these things and all this other stuff. At the end of the day, you got 13 people sitting in a room debating it. You put the 4 of us in the room, we're going to debate stuff, and we're all going to have different opinions. That's just human nature.
No doubt about it. Brent Hubbs with us this morning. Hubbs, I saw something on VolQuest, man. It's one of those message boards, and I think it was a fan that put that up. I know on the message board. They were
Could be anything.
But hear me out, though. The Cold War, or the battle that you're having between the Big Ten and the SEC, somebody had a nice write-up, and I don't know who it is, but I got it bookmarked somewhere. And they said, like, maybe the Big Ten was playing chess and not checkers. They added so many teams that there had to be a have and a have-nots. And somehow, some way, their conference is weighed a little bit heavier if you play conference games. Like, and no matter if, there are some bad teams that have played, and Indiana has played 7 of the worst teams of the Big Ten, but they've won, and they have that on their resume. And it's better than saying they play UTEP or Chattanooga or something like that, whereas the SEC added a bunch of juggernauts, and it's dog-eat-dog, and you got to fight to the end every single weekend. And that way right now, they got 3 of the top 5 positions or spots right now, 3 of the top 6 spots being Big Ten teams. And not only just that, the level of competition is hitting even further at LSU, where right now you got Michigan flipping Bryce Underwood. Are we seeing a real strong back and forth, and maybe the SEC, I don't want to say got too big for its britches and thinking that it can just rule the yard, and maybe they should have taken some cupcake teams?
Well, I mean, first of all, let's talk about Bryce Underwood. Okay, late money makes money. Okay, and that's what happened there. Michigan made a late NIL run there that I think got to the point that it was too much. And you got a guy who's been committed for 300 days, who's flipping to a team that's not going to go to a bowl game this year. Okay, so I mean, there's an NIL factor involved in that one, and everybody knows that there's no secret to that one there. So now let's go to your other question, Ramon. I think it's a great question. The SEC is trying to figure out what to do with their schedule. Okay, beyond 25. Do you go to 9 games and beat up each other even more? Or do you stay at 8 games and continue to play the cupcake games outside your league and, try to avoid as many 2-loss situations as you can? I think it's going to be fascinating to see what the schedule in this league looks like in 26. Now, you're always going to play some tough games, but do you load it differently? Okay, do you put some of your bigger games early in the season because you feel like losing late is worse than losing early? Okay, I don't know. We'll see. I mean, nobody's talking about Notre Dame losing to Northern Illinois. That's the worst loss in college football this year. It's like it didn't happen when you talk about the Irish. It just went away. I mean, the September loss just disappeared. A lot of people talking about Ole Miss losing at home to Kentucky. To me, that's the worst loss in the SEC this year. Okay? Well, that one's gone away because Ole Miss beat Georgia 2 weeks ago, and you've got recency bias. Yep. It's what do you remember last, right? I mean, that's just human nature with your mind. So I do think Greg Sankey has some interesting decisions to make on scheduling moving forward. I think this football thing, the playoff deal is going to change. It's going to expand to 14. I think it'll go to 14 and 26. I think before we get to 2030, it'll be a 16-team playoff. I don't know that it'll get any bigger than that, but you can manipulate the bracket to 16 teams. It makes a lot of sense. But, yeah, I mean, I do think that the Big Ten has benefited from the schedule, particularly Indiana. I mean, they were – they got out of a game against Louisville and picked up a cupcake game. I'm not saying they would have lost to Louisville. They may have beat the brakes off Louisville. But that was a game that should have been a harder game than a couple of their non-conference cupcake games that they played. And then they got the benefit, a little bit of the benefit of their schedule. And Michigan's not very good. We'll see what they do against Ohio State. They haven't played Penn State. They haven't played Oregon this year. And that's part of it. I don't think the SEC should look at that and go, hey, let's go get Arizona to come into the SEC, and let's go get some teams that make a little sense. Because remember, we're in year 1 of this Big Ten deal. What is USC, UCLA, Oregon, Washington? What does that look like financially for those schools when you go through basketball, baseball, softball, all of those things? It's easy in football, but what does that look like for all those teams? How much does it work? And if you're Greg Sankey, you do have to look at your league beyond football. But football-wise, scheduling in 26 is going to be pretty fascinating to view and see what happens.
Absolutely. Brent Hubbs joining us as he does every Friday at this time here on Ramon, Kayla, and Will. Brent, for this game this weekend, and we spoke about how style points do matter. What have you done for me lately does matter. But for Tennessee's benefit, what did they get out of, this type of game where they have opportunities? I know that finishing drives has been a point of emphasis, especially I think Brew McCoy brought that up this week.
Yeah, I mean, and you got to finish early. I mean, Brew talked about, basically says it's time for us to quit talking about what our potential is and go out and play the way we're supposed to play. And he's exactly right. I mean, Tennessee they've been in the opponent's territory on 70% of their offensive drives this season. They just haven't finished well enough. I think in SEC games, it's something like 19 drives into the opponent's territory. They've scored on 11 of the 19. They got to be more productive. They've got to finish on offense. Now, what you would like to do in this game is you would like to come out and just jump all over the Miners and put that game to where everybody sees it across the bottom of the screen, or the halftime report somewhere, the post-game report says, Tennessee is just, laying the wood to UTEP. And then you're in the second half, and Nico's standing on the sidelines, and Dylan Sampson's out of the game. And on the offensive line, you're playing Larry Johnson, and you're playing Bennett Warren, and you're playing all these young offensive linemen that you got to figure out which ones are going to play for you next year. Because remember this, you're getting ready to go into the portal window. How many do you need? Well, I think you would like to know how far some of these guys have progressed since the last time you saw them play in a game, which was Kent State over 2 months ago. Because you're trying to roster manage. You're also trying to keep everybody healthy. You're trying to win big and have style points. You got a lot you're trying to deal with on a game where you're favored by 6 touchdowns. And so we'll see. I think in the best-case scenario, the game's over at the half, and you're playing young players in the second half for some evaluation purposes, and also to keep them engaged. They're trying to make decisions on their future as well. All that stuff counts when you play games like this.
Yeah, and while you definitely want to see, you guys up at a big amount by the half so that you can do that, what – in terms of, I should say, who can benefit one of these seniors of really, because this is senior day, coming in and maybe who could benefit from this type of game just with the confidence side of things when it comes to heading into the rest of the season?
From an older player standpoint, or
yeah,
from a younger player standpoint?
Like the seniors, we were speaking of guys that we would take that we'd love to see a big game out of, even if it is for a half on Saturday, because it is senior day.
Well, I mean, but emotionally, you would like to see, you'd like to see a lot of those veteran guys play well, right? I mean, it's their last time in Neyland Stadium. Certainly you'd like to see a guy like Brew McCoy have a big day, and those guys on the defensive line. I mean, I don't know that there's a guy that you say, man, he's a veteran who's playing a lot right now, but he's kind of struggling, and he needs to have this happen to him to really get him jump started and get him going. In terms of an older player. But listen, I mean, defensively, they got to get after the quarterback some. They got to get back to their edge that they haven't had the last couple of weeks. Now, UTEP's going to throw it underneath. They're going to get it out of their hands quick. I think if you're talking about a group of players that need to play well in this game to kind of get themselves back right, and get going, it's probably the linebackers. Now, there's not seniors involved in that group, but I think you need those linebackers to play better than they played. I mean, they had 9 total tackles last week against Georgia. I thought Georgia worked their eyes pretty good with misdirection and some play action stuff. Now you're going to have to play in space, and that's what they're going to do. Is they're going to play, tunnel screens, wide receiver screens, and things over the middle, underneath stuff. Less than 10 yards from the line of scrimmage. So I think the linebackers got to get themselves right and get going.
Yeah. Brent, is it fair to say the Tennessee defense has hit a little bit of a wall, at least up front? How much of the struggles last week, in your opinion, were them not playing well, or just Mike Bobo and Carson Beck and just a better plan that Georgia had to exploit some of Tennessee's weaknesses?
Well, the plan doesn't work if you can't block them.
Right.
And Georgia blocked Tennessee, okay? I mean, you can go in with, hey, we're going to go misdirection and we're going to do this, and if you don't have time to execute any of that stuff, then the plan doesn't work. That's why everybody always will say it's about the Jimmies and Joes instead of the X's and O's. Tennessee didn't win enough up front. And if you'd have told me, if we'd have sat here last week and we'd have made some kind of Ramon Foster bet, I would have been like Ramon, and I would have lost because I would have bet the house that Tennessee was going to tackle Carson Beck at some point in the backfield. They were going to hit him. They were going to get a sack. They didn't. They didn't get near him. He got comfortable, and it was 7-on-7 for Carson Beck for the last 3 quarters of the football game after a 2-for-9 horrific start for him. Tennessee tried to blitz. I think they blitzed 15 times. They didn't get home. They didn't get there with loops and twists, and that's a Georgia offensive line that was just absolutely embarrassed in Oxford, Mississippi. That bounced back in a big way. But I think the most surprising thing about this defensive line, and we've talked about them all fall, and I think they're very talented and a good defensive line, that they're like 10th in the SEC in sacks, which is really surprising. Now, some of that may be scheme that on 3rd and long, they've played to keep the ball in front of them and play it to the sticks because they have been in 3rd and long. Every stat for Tim Banks this year is better than it's ever been since he's been here, except the sack numbers. This will be they're on pace for the lowest number of sacks they've had in the Tim Banks era at Tennessee, which, given this defensive line and what we talked about in the preseason, I don't think anybody saw that coming.
Brent Hubbs of VolQuest and On 3 joins us Fridays here on the show. Tennessee and UTEP, you'll hear him a part of Vol Network coverage as well tomorrow afternoon here on 104.5 The Zone. Brent, excellent as always, sir. Thank you.
Yes, indeed.
All right, thanks, guys. Have a great weekend.
Yes,
You
sir.
too, Brent.
Brent Hubbs of VolQuest joining us. Brought to you by Ascend Federal Credit Union, your financial partner for every stage of life. Coming up, let's shift gears a little bit. Nick Holtz, Titans offensive coordinator, yesterday talked about one area where the Titans have slacked. There is one stat about a part of the Titans that I had to triple check, and it's real. And that's next.